So I'm a member of the Globe and Mail's investigative team, and in June 2015, it seemed that no matter where I was in the city, I kept getting into the same conversation over and over and over again, that the system was failing sexual assault victims. And it got me thinking, is there a story here? Is there something that can be done? And what we ended up focusing on was this very specific statistic around when police move forward with a case or don't. They decide this case is unfounded, this allegation didn't occur, or it's worthy of a more robust investigation. And after hundreds of Freedom of Information requests collecting data from more than 870 police jurisdictions, what we learned is that on average, 1 out of every 5 sexual assault claims reported to Canadian police was being dismissed as invalid. And when a case ends up unfounded, it wasn't reported to Statistics Canada, it was essentially scrubbed from the public record. Now, there are really real implications here for public policy because decision makers and lawmakers rely on those stats to make evidence-based decisions around funding for victims' resources as well as police services. The Unfounded investigation is actually a good news story in the end, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I did want to highlight another story that I think is almost more appropriate for this venue, and it's one that really stuck with me. The other part of the Unfounded investigation was the people. So we did a lot of work on the data, but I also investigated more than 50 specific claims of sexual assault. And there's one that, again, I keep coming back to because I can imagine myself as this girl. This was the story of 17-year-old Maddie. Maddie, this was, just a couple of years ago. She's still a teenager today. And Maddie woke up one morning after being out with her friends, and she had been drinking, and she texted her mother, I think I've been raped, from her bedroom upstairs, because she didn't want to talk to her mother about it directly. Her mother runs upstairs, they have a conversation, she's very upset. They go to the police service. Her mother says she's very nervous. She's afraid the kids at school are going to be mad at her, that she's worried how it's going to impact his life. And her mother says, just trust the officers. Go in, tell your story, let them decide. So they go into this police service, and she's sitting on this couch, and she's sitting there with her parents before the officer comes in, and she's talking about her concerns. The officer knocks on the door, says it's time for the interview. Her mother kisses her on her cheek, says, I'm right outside, and leaves. And as Maddie starts, the officer sits down, says, I'm going to record this video. And before she even starts to tell her story, the officer says, I don't necessarily think a criminal charge is warranted here, before she even starts to tell her story. And as Maddie then recounts what happened through the night, the officer doesn't really ask her any questions about what happened. She finally comes back, this is about 20 minutes in, and asks Maddie a series of questions, such as, what were you wearing? How much did he have to drink? Was your clothing ripped? Have you ever had sex before? Do you have a boyfriend? 30 minutes in, the officer says, quote, I think there may have been a misunderstanding on his end, believing that there was consent. A person who is highly intoxicated cannot give consent, but my only concern is that it sounds like he was intoxicated at the same time. So I think educating him is a good thing, but I think educating you is a good thing too, because you have to take a little bit of responsibility as well, right? You unfortunately drank too much. At this point, the officer had not done any work at all on this investigation, hadn't interviewed the suspect, hadn't looked for any witnesses. She just sat down and done this case. The purpose of the Unfounded investigation was not to prove whether someone had been raped or not raped. It was purely looking at the police response. And what we know for sure around this case is that a teenager went to her police service, she was frightened, and she told the officer what happened, and she left feeling ashamed and embarrassed. And to this day, still feels ashamed and embarrassed because of what happened in that room. She was not so concerned that the individual was not charged. She was just doing what she thought she's supposed to do in that situation. And I was a teenager. I went to university. I could easily have been Maddie. And that's why these stories really resonated with me. What happened to Maddie, the Unfounded investigation, Harvey Weinstein, Me Too, all of these ills are dredged from this same pool of misogyny. And what's great about days like today, and hopefully the work that we're doing at the Globe, is that this is time to drain that swamp.